Welcome to episode 119. And here's a question for you. What if your company's culture isn't as healthy as you think it is? Even in workplaces where everything seems fine, people are polite, there are free snacks, there are values on the wall, there can still be a disconnect between what we say we stand for and what's actually happening. And when those gaps widen, we end up with what's called shadow values. And these are the real values, often the unspoken rules and behaviours that are shaping our culture. And if they're left unchecked, these shadow values can turn our culture toxic. So, in this episode, I want to share the early warning signs that your culture might just be going off course before it becomes a headline, hopefully not, or an employee turnover crisis. So let's start with a common myth, which is that we have a great culture because everyone gets along. There are no issues. I'm not hearing anything from everyone. And yes, that might sound okay on the surface and everything might look fine. But a nice culture doesn't always mean a healthy one. And actually, a common red flag is a lack of conflict or feedback. And by conflict, I don't mean people having big arguments or fighting in the workplace, but just challenging each other or raising concerns. That silence may be a sign of harmony, but it could also be a sign of fear. And even if it is harmony, are we actually challenging each other appropriately to get new ideas and thinking in the workplace, or are we full of groupthink? So that disconnect between your stated values, so the ones that are on your website, are they the same as the lived experience of your team? Because that's where our shadow values are. And in a previous episode, I talked about companies with beautifully worded values like integrity, excellence, curiosity. But, at least according to media reports, their actions, especially at a leadership level, told a very different story. So when the employees see that disconnect, then they stop trusting, they disengage, and eventually they'll leave. So if you think about common values for organizations, things like diversity, integrity, trust, and then reflect on different media stories that you see about organizations that have badly behaving CEOs or leadership teams. And if I'm an employee watching my CEO behave this way while reading about integrity in our values, how believable are those values to me? Not every business is going to end up in a media investigation, but I've also seen smaller businesses struggle with this too. And I remember once a small organization where there was a manager who was known for belittling team members in meetings. And no one said anything because they said, well, that's just the way that they are. But over time, those small moments really erode trust and impact on your culture. And eventually people started leaving. And they weren't leaving loudly, they were just leaving quietly. So it really wasn't brought to the surface that the culture was getting toxic and that toxicity was growing, because the more that you have people that are willing to leave because they don't want those behaviors around them, and the more people that are happy with those behaviors stay, that's how your culture starts to change. And it's not always through dramatic incidents, but it's just those patterns of ignored behavior. So let's talk about the red flags that a culture might be heading in the wrong direction, even if everyone seems nice on the surface. First is silence in meetings. If no one is challenging ideas or asking questions, maybe it's because they don't feel safe to do so. Number two, anonymous feedback gives you some surprises. If what you're hearing in surveys doesn't match what you thought you knew, then that's a clue. And I've come across business owners and leaders that hate the idea of anonymous surveys, but that's where you're going to get people actually telling you the truth. Number three, excusing behavior. If you hear yourself say things like, oh, that's just the way they are, that means that unacceptable behavior is being normalized. Number 4, lack of clarity around values. If you yourself or you ask your team to name your company values and they can't or you can't, or worse, your employees roll their eyes when you ask about the company values, that's telling. And number 5, informal team support. So people aren't trusting in leadership, so they're leaning on each other and they're raising issues at the water cooler because maybe they're fearful of retaliation or just inaction. And number 6, people who do raise concerns are sidelined. Are people being ignored or punished or pushed out? That's a huge cultural warning. So if any of these red flags are sparking a bit of a question in your mind, then what can you do? Here are a few starting points. Firstly, you start listening. So use anonymous surveys, focus groups, or even one-on-one chats to understand what people are really experiencing. Review your values. Are they still relevant? Do your team actually believe in your values? Do they see them in the workplace? Lead by example. The behavior of the leadership team sets the tone for the whole business. Call it out. If you see behavior that contradicts the values, don't let it slide. It doesn't matter if it's a manager or a top performer, the message needs to be clear that our values matter. Make feedback safe. The psychological safety isn't just a buzzword, it is essential for innovation, trust, and retention. And when I run workplace behavior sessions with clients, my overarching message is that if you see something, do something, because culture is owned by everyone. So just because you have values on your wall does not mean that you have those values in your workplace. Shadow values can show up in any business, but if you take the time to listen, reflect, and lead with integrity, you can turn things around. It's when we leave a culture just to run on autopilot and we assume that our great culture will just continue, that's where trouble can start, because culture needs to be intentional, monitored, and managed. If you need some help spotting shadow values in your business, you can also book a free discovery call with us. We'd love to help you find the hidden patterns that are holding you back and help you fix them before they become something bigger. Just have a look in the show notes or head on over to amplifyhr.com.au. And if you've received value from this episode, leave a rating over at Apple Podcasts or Spotify so someone else can also find the episodes to help with their business. Episodes are released on Mondays, so click subscribe and you'll be notified of when it's available. Thanks so much for joining me. If you have any feedback, questions, or ideas for future episodes, head on over to amplifyhr.com.au or connect with me on LinkedIn and we can start a conversation.